A mother is gunned down by her own boyfriend. Then he took it a step further and ran her over multiple times with her car. Then he fled to Alabama. Now federal prosecutors are building a case against him. We're breaking down what allegedly led this man to shoot and kill his girlfriend, who he just began dating. Thanks for joining us on Law and Crime. I'm Elizabeth Millner. Deputies in Florida report this man fired at his girlfriend more than 15 times. Now, we got our hands on the federal court documents, which charges the 30-year-old with cyberstalking, interstate domestic violence, murder through the use of a firearm, plus more. The early stages of a relationship are supposed to be fun. You're getting to know someone new, spending time together, all of that. It's unclear how Starmichael Tucker and her boyfriend Charles Carson-Dowdy met. Starmichael had previously graduated from Florida A&M University with a nursing degree. She served in the Air Force for a little bit. Then the California native was working in Pensacola while also caring for her young son. Starmichael's sister Rhea previously told WEAR News in Florida her sister was the light that shined through everyone's darkness. Rhea told the outlet that she didn't see any red flags in the few short months that her sister was dating Charles. She initially thought that he seemed sweet and innocent, and as a couple, they looked happy. But about 3 to 4 months into the relationship, something allegedly snapped in Charles. Back in early January, the Escambia County Sheriff's Office began investigating a homicide. A woman was found shot multiple times at a local apartment complex. The woman was ID'd as Starmichael. The sheriff saying at the time at least 15 shots were fired at her, with about 7 of those bullets hitting her. As if that wasn't horrific enough, deputies say her killer ran over her with her own Jeep, then backed up over her before eventually getting away. She was transported to a hospital, but she died from her injuries. Sheriff Chip Simmons told local reporters at the time of the murder, whatever triggered this, obviously it's unwarranted, this use of violence. But to use this level of violence, this level of brutality, it's uncalled for. The Jeep Cherokee allegedly used to run over Starmichael was eventually found over in Alabama. And guess who was driving her Jeep? None other than Starmichael's boyfriend, Charles. It's been reported that when deputies were on scene at the apartment complex, they got word that Charles had contacted the father of Starmichael's child. Charles allegedly told him that Starmichael was dead and that he didn't want to talk about what happened. But it seemed that he might have called someone else too. According to WEAR, a man called 911 a short time after saying that he knew where Charles was located. The man told dispatchers he heard about the shooting and recognized the apartment complex because he previously worked with Charles and would often drop him off to that very same apartment complex. The coworker who called 911 reportedly texted Charles asking if he was okay, and he allegedly responded not at all. Charles allegedly told the man he shot Starmichael like 16 times. Charles allegedly claimed that when he was with Starmichael, everything was good. Then something sent him into a rage and he shot her multiple times. According to the report, Charles told the man that he was underneath the bridge heading to Mobile, Alabama. Deputies reportedly tried to get the coworker to call Charles back so they could listen in and get more information. Charles picked up telling the man that he was waiting for someone to come look at the car tire because he had a flat. The coworker said that he encouraged Charles to turn himself in, but Charles allegedly said he was scared. Deputies used that information to track him down. He was arrested by Spanish Fort Police a short while later. According to police, Charles allegedly had a gun in the center console of the Jeep. And he reportedly didn't say much either, except, "My life is over." When he was extradited back to Florida, he was charged with second-degree murder. And a judge denied him bond. That was earlier this year. Just this week, federal prosecutors announced Charles has been indicted by a federal grand jury. According to the indictment, under count 1, Charles Carson-Dowdy, with the intent to kill, injure, harass, intimidate, and place under surveillance with the intent to kill, injure, harass, and intimidate another person, that is Starmichael L. Tucker, did use an electronic communication and electronic communication system of interstate commerce and a facility of interstate and foreign commerce, to wit, a cellular telephone, interstate wires, and the internet, to engage in a course of conduct that caused and attempted to cause and would be responsibly accepted to cause substantial emotional distress to that person, and in the course of engaging in such conduct cause the death of that person. Under count 2, Charles is accused of traveling in interstate commerce with the intent to kill, injure, harass, and intimidate an intimate partner and dating partner, and in the course of, and as a result of such travel and presence, committed a crime of violence against the intimate partner and dating partner, to wit, the murder of Starmichael L. Tucker. Under count 3, Charles is accused of knowingly and carrying a handgun during and in relation to a crime of violence for which he may be prosecuted in a court of the United States, that is interstate domestic violence, as charged in count 2 of the indictment. Under count 4, Charles allegedly did knowingly discharge, use, and carry a firearm, that is a handgun, during and in relation to a crime of violence. And finally, under count 5, Charles is accused of knowing that he had previously been convicted of a crime punishable by imprisonment for a term exceeding 1 year, knowingly possessed a firearm and ammunition in and affecting interstate and foreign commerce. Now, that charge came about because, according to the indictment, in August of 2024, Charles was convicted in Texas of criminal mischief, and even after his conviction, allegedly possessed a pistol and 9mm ammunition. Now, if Charles is convicted on his federal charges, he's facing up to life in prison. Now, he hasn't entered a plea yet for his federal charges. He'll be arraigned later in the week. I'm joined now by criminal defense attorney Safa Robinson-Ferrer to break this down even further. Safa, are you surprised that these federal charges came 7 months after Charles Carson-Dowdy was arrested?
I am surprised to an extent that this took this long. However, I think the uniqueness of this case, and especially considering that the victim of this case was a member of the United States Armed Forces, I think that the federal government took a look at this case, and I know that there's an initiative that they're working on right now. It's Project Take Back America, and they're seeking prosecutions under this particular initiative. And so I think that it took them some time to really take a look and dive into this case. But I think that because of the nature of the case, because of the interstate component, and because the victim in this case, Ms. Tucker, was a member of the United States Armed Forces, that the federal government saw fit to take jurisdiction and prosecute Mr. Dowdy.
And it's interesting your breakdown of that, because initially I had thought maybe it was just because he had crossed state lines over with her car, and that was the simple explanation as to why he was looking at federal charges now. But your breakdown makes a lot more sense than what I was initially thinking. And when we look at this overall offense, it's just horrific. These two were dating only for a few months, according to reports, and we don't know the full details of what led up to the shooting. But obviously it doesn't matter, because Starmichael was shot more than a dozen, or shot at more than a dozen times, with about 7 of those bullets hitting her. And it feels like it just goes past rage, even with Charles allegedly running her over multiple times too. And it just feels so sinister and disturbing. But what's your reaction to the overall offense that happened?
It's absolutely sinister, and I hate to use this term, but it's completely overkill. This isn't just a case where, there's a domestic incident or there's an argument between two people. One of them is shot and killed. This is an individual who shot this woman, or allegedly shot this woman, like to your point, over a dozen times. And not only that, but ran her over with a vehicle. At what point is enough enough? At what point does the rage stop in a case and situation like this? So this case is completely gruesome, completely sinister. I do see that it is fit, to prosecute on both ends, federally and stateside on this case. And Mr. Dowdy is looking at spending the rest of his life in prison, and if convicted, rightfully so.
I think even when he was arrested, I think he had uttered something allegedly along the lines of, my life is over, and that might be the case. And normally when we see these types of cases, it's between a couple that have been dating for a while. Not that that negates anything at all, but longer than Starmichael and Charles were together. But why do you think he allegedly flew off the handle so quickly and so aggressively with her like that? It feels like there was more leading up to this moment. He wouldn't just allegedly bring out a gun, just start shooting at her 15, 16 times, and then just run her over. It just seems like more might have been going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely. And my guess, and again, I'm speculating at this point, is that Miss Tucker probably rejected him in some sort of way. The rejection ultimately, and again, I'm speculating, and these are all allegations, is that it caused him to fly off the handle, to be so upset and so angry that he decided that he was going to stalk her, that he was ultimately going to hunt her down, kill her, and run her over with a vehicle. Again, because of that rejection. And again, yes, I'm speculating. Not only that, but I think a lot of times when we look at cases like this, we have to also look at where that rage comes from, because it's so out of the ordinary. And when we look at cases like this, oftentimes we see that it's rooted in childhood. Maybe he was rejected in certain ways throughout his childhood, and ultimately those continue to perpetuate into his adult life to the point where he determined that it was fit to use violence against anybody who may have rejected him. So that is a possibility. Those are my thoughts on this case.
And it seems like there was also kind of some speculation on social media that maybe this happened because Starmichael was trying to break up with him, something along those lines. Nothing been verified through prosecutors just yet, but just some speculation to your point, Safa, that I've been seeing kind of circulate online. And are you surprised by the defendant's actions in the aftermath? Most people try to keep kind of a low cover if they allegedly do a murder or something like that. But according to reports, Charles made phone calls to Starmichael's child's father, to his coworker. He allegedly stole her Jeep, and the only reason he was caught was because he had a flat tire in her Jeep. But do you think that things would have worked out differently if he would have just stayed on the scene, possibly called 911?
I think that's kind of a subjective question to the extent like him calling her child's father is absolutely bizarre. Why would somebody do that, especially if you've just committed a murder? I can understand somebody fleeing because they don't want to be prosecuted for what they've just done. But we've also got the admissions or the comments from him where he allegedly says, "My life is over." So all of these things give pause and really say what is really going on in the mind of this individual that would cause him to commit so many alleged odd acts, and a lot of times, and I hate to use this as a throwaway, but when we have individuals who have gone through with mental health diagnosis or other traumas that have been untreated for some time, we see this behavior. Maybe not to the significant extent, but we do see this behavior. And not only that, but we have certain individuals, unfortunately, who are of the belief if I can't have you, no one else will. And I think that this is one of those cases.
And another question that comes to my mind is how did the gun end up there? And do you think that this possibly, even though he's been charged with second degree murder on a state level, that this case also may fit the qualifications of first degree murder? We don't know if it's been premeditated, but do you think there's any argument for first degree murder here, especially when he was allegedly traveling with a weapon?
There is absolutely argument for first degree murder. And in my mind, this is premeditated first degree murder, or the facts here would fit that type of allegation. We have evidence of cyberstalking. And again, when I say evidence, there's at least a basis of probable cause to believe that this individual committed these acts. And the law would require that the acts to fit into a certain framework or statute so that he traveled via interstate lines with the carrying this firearm, that he traveled across interstate lines with the purpose of intentionally stalking or harming or harassing or ultimately killing Miss Tucker, which he is alleged to have done here. And so I think that travel component and the plotting and the planning, and there are certain other overt acts that are required, does make a showing that this is first degree murder or would be qualified as a first degree murder on the state side.
And as a criminal defense attorney, what type of defenses do you think the defendant has at play here, especially when you think of all these other aggravating factors like allegedly fleeing in her Jeep and uttering that his life was over and making all these calls after the shooting? But if you were his attorney, what kind of defenses would you use in your holster?
Definitely a difficult case to defend. One of the first defenses that we go to look to is, the I didn't do it defense. I don't think that's going to be applicable here because of the certain things that he had done afterward that might show a consciousness of guilt. So, would a jury ultimately believe that he had nothing to do with the murder of this woman? Probably not. Second, we go to what would cause someone to act in this way? If we are going to at least admit that we were a party to this, what happened? Was my client in the right state of mind? Is this the appropriate culpable mental state? Was this reckless? Was there any type of provocation or anything like that that would apply to lessen the blow of what we could face on the penalty phase here? Or ultimately, there's a mental health diagnosis where he was not competent at that point in time, or he's not competent to stand trial. And so we challenge those things. And lastly, if there are any legal technical defenses where the case might ultimately fall through the cracks on speedy trial grounds or anything like that. And I would also note, when it comes to homicide cases, there's no statute of limitation on the homicide cases, but speedy trial provisions will apply. So if there's any other legal technicalities that could be applied, we would also take a look at those as well.
And how many times have we seen cases that, charges have been downgraded or charges have been thrown out because of legal technicalities? So we'll see what continues to happen there. And my final question to you, Safa, is if you had a crystal ball, how do you see this case playing out? Do you see it kind of ending in a plea deal, possibly going all the way through trial? What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are this will probably result in a plea deal, and why I say that is because at this point in time, he's being laterally prosecuted. He's being prosecuted stateside and he's being prosecuted federally. He is facing life in prison for certain. Whether or not the charges that he faces will be death penalty qualifying or whether the government will move for the death penalty is the question at this point. One of the things that could be an agreed upon disposition is plead guilty to the charges. You'll agree to spend the rest of your life in prison without the possibility of any parole or release, and we will take the death penalty off the table. Oftentimes, that is how these cases are resolved when we have prosecutions like this, and they're so egregious in nature.
Yep, and we'll be following this case to see how this continues to play out. Again, Safa Robinson-Freer, thank you so much for your time and your insight into this case. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
According to the U.S. Attorney's Office, Charles Carson-Dowdy will be arraigned on August 28th. Online records as of this recording show he's still in the Escambia County Jail in Florida on no bond. Thanks so much for joining us here on Law and Crime. I'm Elizabeth Millner.